Hi, thanks for joining me. So today I'd like to do a music vlog. This is something that was inspired directly by a couple of tweets that I saw on Twitter from some YouTube gaming community members, Shintai and Devil May Pie. Now, this isn't really a direct response to those two guys, but they were responding to a tweet that was like, "Hey, what are albums that you would give a 10 out of 10?" And they both gave a list of them, and it just got me thinking. I was like, "Well, what albums would I give a 10 out of 10?" And this is, it's super subjective. Everybody, likes different kinds of music. Some of it depends on like when you started getting into music, or just times in your life when you were into music, like when that was, how old you were, and all of those things. So yeah. Anyway, these videos that I've done in the past have gotten some positive responses, though. So I wanted to share this with you guys. I thought you might get a kick out of it. Some people that watch my channel. So for starters, obviously we have Louder Than Love. Now we're gonna go chronologically. So I'm starting off here in 1989. We'll end up, closer to now. But this album, when I was first getting into music a little more, like as a teen, it was probably about 1992. So the first Soundgarden album that I listened to was Bad Motorfinger. And probably if you put these two albums on a scale, I might say like my more favorite album is probably Bad Motorfinger. But another criteria for me for putting albums on this list and giving them a 10 out of 10 is that I don't think of them as a collection of songs. I'm not like, oh yeah, I want to listen to that album with Rusty Cage on it, or with Outshined on it, or something like that. And that's not to say that I don't, listen to the whole album of Bad Motorfinger a lot of times, but Louder Than Love, like, I when I want to listen to that, I think, oh, I want to listen to Louder Than Love. I want to listen to the album, and I listen to the whole thing. I think of it as sort of one indivisible whole. So I bought two albums basically after I heard Bad Motorfinger. I was like, man, I need to see if there's more of this. I got Ultra Mega OK and Louder Than Love at the same time, just incidentally. But this album, it does have a strong theme, and it's a little crass in some ways too. It's really about love and sex. I mean, you have these songs like Big Dumb Sex and Ugly Truth and Hands All Over and Get on the Snake and Full On Kevin's Mom, and it's really like, it's not subtle with its theme. But I think, I don't know, I mean, like, these guys were young, honestly, and like they put together an amazing album. It's kind of like a start and an end, I feel like, for the band. This was, here it says here, the last Soundgarden album to feature the band's original bassist Hiro Yamamoto, and it just says he left the band, so I assume that they parted on good terms. I mean, who knows, but like he left anyway for whatever reason, and continued making music and stuff like that, so that's great. But with Bad Motorfinger, they brought on, I think it's Ben Shepherd, and their sound changed a little bit, and I think for the better. Like Ben Shepherd wrote a couple songs on the album and stuff like that. But with this one, this was their debut major label. It's their second overall studio album, but this was sort of, they got signed to a bigger label, produced by Terry Date. Now, I don't know, them as a producer in particular, but like the sound that they got on this album, it's super great. It's so consistent. It sounds, probably like they recorded it all in the same studio, although I don't know, it says London Bridge Studios and in Seattle, Washington, so I guess that's just one studio. It just has this great sound, and it just brings you through all 12 of these songs all together just to make what I think is a 10 out of 10 album. It's really great. Next, we have Too Dark Park. I feel like I've probably talked about this before on the channel, once or twice. But this is Skinny Puppy. Again, right from that same period of time here. Too Dark Park was released in 1990, and I got these two albums, Last Rites and Too Dark Park, at the same time. And Last Rites is a great album, but it does not hold a candle, I think, to Too Dark Park, just in terms of being like a solid 10 out of 10 album. This album is an experience. And if you're curious about industrial, or, even listen to industrial and for some reason have never listened to Too Dark Park, it's amazing. I don't know the specifics of the production of this album. They talk a little bit here about the Revolting Cox, which is a ministry side project, and some stuff with. I think they talk about Al Jurgensen and stuff in here a little bit, but the impression that I get from this, whether it's right or wrong, is that they just sort of went into the studio and like just sort of stream of consciousness, like cranked this album out. It just that was something that I read before, or an impression that I got, is that this album just sort of flowed out in the studio, and maybe I'm wrong about that and I'm just sort of embellishing, but regardless, that's the feeling that I get. Is like this band just had this moment and birthed this thing out into the world, and it's perfect, and it's twisted and crazy and weird to listen to. It's one of the most just I don't know, unique listening experiences I think that I have ever had, and it has a lot of samples from like horror movies and things like that. It really has this like twisted, like horror movie fever dream soundtrack kind of feeling to it, and it's probably one of the less sort of poppy or catchy or even approachable albums of I would say sort of like the major industrial bands, or Skinny Puppy at all. But because of that, I think it's one of their most amazing albums. This, unfortunately, too, I think this is one of those albums where you feel Dwayne's influence the most, and he unfortunately passed away, I think, due to drugs, not so long after making this album. I think he did work on The Process, which was not their next album. So he worked on Last Rites, and I think he worked on The Process. So he was with the band for a few more years, and those are great albums. The Process in particular, I really like a lot. It's they call it maybe a little more post-industrial, and it probably has a little more like rock and metal influences in it, whereas Too Dark Park is something else entirely. It's a very, very great album. 10 out of 10, obviously. Next up, we have Alice in Chains with Facelift. Now, this is an album that I guess apparently was also recorded at London Bridge Studios in Seattle. Maybe what was it? No, okay, this is Dave Jordan, not what was it? Terry Date, I think. But yeah, it's. This is another sort of like debut studio album from Alice in Chains here, and I love all of Alice in Chains' stuff. Again, I got into their slightly later stuff, so I really probably heard Dirt and Sap before Facelift. But again, I found this band, and I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. What else have they done? And just a little video game memory. I may have mentioned this before, but my folks, I think it would have been on the Christmas of 1992, right when it had come out, the Sega CD add-on was gifted to me by them for my Sega Genesis. And that Christmas also, they gifted me a couple of kind of ironically audio cassettes, Alice in Chains Facelift and Nirvana Bleach. And my memories so distinctly of that Christmas are just of listening to those two albums over and over again and playing the living heck out of my Sega CD. Wonderful memories. And this album, it's again, someone we tragically lost to drugs, Lane Staley, and his lyrics have always been dark, and he's kind of had a lot of personal demons, I think, that kind of come out in his music and his lyric writing. Even in this, you have stuff like We Die Young, Sea of Sorrow, Man in the Box, Love, Hate, Love, just all of this stuff. there's sort of very tumultuous emotions in this album, but at the same time, like it also it's really well produced, and it just really comes together. Like all of these songs, again, when I listen to this, it's like I'm not just listening to Man in the Box or something. I just the whole album is so great, and maybe some of it is like my memories too of just listening to the whole thing at once. It comes together so well for me. I just absolutely love Facelift. I think it's a 10 out of 10. Next we have Nude Swirl. Now, so of course, around this time we're still here in 1993. And so I'm getting into essentially grunge bands. That's kind of what they called this, and industrial bands. So this is very much on the grunge end. And from what I read, Nude Swirl, I mean, they toured with like White Zombie and Danzig, who aren't exactly grunge bands, but they're also bands that I like quite a lot. Sort of like I guess you would call like kind of horror rock and groove metal. I think they call White Zombie and stuff like that. But they played like at Lollapalooza, I guess, like a side stage. And anyway, the way that I was introduced to them was like I think many people, on Beavis and Butthead. They had a music video on MTV, and Beavis and Butthead ended up, making fun of and simultaneously praising their music video and the song, and it was great. It was so good. So I had to get this album, and I am actually re-recording this because I didn't realize. So Nude Swirl chronology, you have Nude Swirl from 1993, and this is the track list, and there was another album from 1989, and this is the track list. And I was like, seriously? I only ever thought that they released one album, and it's kind of hard because I guess they were both kind of self-titled or untitled. I mean, I guess this one says Nude Swirl on the cover, and it's called Nude Swirl, but this one just sort of, there's no title, and it's also called Nude Swirl, their 1993 album. So you can understand my confusion, I guess. It's kind of an obscure band, and anyway, I had this album. In 1993, 1994, right around in there, and it's incredible. Again, this is one of those things, like, it feels like this band could have been just as huge as any of these other like grunge bands or anything like that. The sound is amazing on this. It's so psychedelic. They have this kind of psychedelic rock with this like grunge metal. It's honestly, it's super, like, it's hooky, like just the singer and the songwriting that just went into this. It's so it's amazing. I mean, basically, in 2005, it says here, the album was placed at number 427 on Rock Hard magazine's list of the 500 greatest rock and metal albums of all time, and I can't disagree with that. Even in this other thing here, they talk about their influences, and they went on to like play in other bands and stuff like that. But like this band, it just 1988 to 1995. I mean, honestly, that's not a bad run. And I guess we had a couple albums out of it, but it's just they're talking about being hailed by like Perry Farrell and bands like Tool and Radiohead, actually like citing Nude Swirl among their influences, and I can just I that makes perfect sense to me. Amazing band, and this album, easily a 10 out of 10. I love this album. Next up, we have Millennium by Frontline Assembly. Now, this is one of those albums that this was the album that introduced me to this band. But I do have a number of other Frontline Assembly albums, probably at least, I think in total I have at least 5 or 6 albums by Frontline Assembly. They're really good, and a little more, I mean, they call them industrial metal. I think on this album in particular is a bit more industrial metal. A lot of their other stuff's a little more, I don't know what you'd call it, like electronic industrial. But this one in particular, it took me a little while to get into, but I would listen to this so much. And they sample a whole bunch of like riffs directly from other like metal artists. So like I would recognize stuff. Like I'd listen to Pantera, and like in Division of Mind, they they sample A New Level from Pantera. I think in the song Millennium also, Surface Patterns, they sample Walk by Pantera. They sample Sepultura. They sample other bands. Depeche Mode, Coil, Tears for Fears, stuff like that. And so I don't want you to think that like Frontline Assembly just cribs stuff from other bands. Like this was a fusion that was incredible of like these electronic beats and these electronic sounds with like Frontline Assembly is just sort of like unique vocals and sampling in these riffs, and also these movie samples. So you have all these movies again, which I also was really into at the time. Aliens and The Fly and Darkman, and I mean Hellraiser and Evil Dead. At least all these things that I love, and it all comes together to make this album that is incredible. Again, this it's one of those things like I listen to the whole album. I don't, and there are songs that stick out on this Liquid Separation, maybe in particular Plasma Springs and stuff like that, but I don't just listen to this album for those songs. It's such a well produced, well written, just complete package that yeah, I think this is a 10 out of 10 album by Frontline Assembly. Next we have Astro Creep 2000. Now this is White Zombie, obviously, and so White Zombie kind of like I feel like they sort of get a pass as industrial metal. And this groove metal, which I guess I don't know, like it is groovy. So I guess I'm not really familiar with that as a genre, but whatever White Zombie is, I love it. And the two albums that I'm the most familiar with are La Sexorcisto, Devil Music Volume 1, and Astro Creep 2000, and I think honestly, but basically both of them are 10 out of 10 albums. The reason why, and this was produced by Terry Dates, so here we go. Maybe I have a little bit of a preference here for Terry Dates producing. The sound on this album is incredible, and it's just I think just out of the two, I like this album a little bit more. But again, it's not necessarily about the which albums are my favorite, but just I think this is easily a 10 out of 10 album. Again, like I on this album, I don't think More Human Than Human is like better than iZombie, is better than Grease Paint and Monkey Brains. It's a whole package. You listen to this thing from start to finish, and it's an experience. I don't know if you guys have listened to White Zombie before or Astro Creep 2000, but I definitely recommend it. But yeah, just an incredible album. Next up, we have KMFDM. I feel like I couldn't leave them out of this list. Now, I would say probably my favorite industrial band, kind of an industrial rock, industrial metal band, is Ministry. They actually didn't end up on this list, but that's not because they haven't made albums that I think are 10s out of 10. I just, I wanted to kind of keep it to things that were, I thought were especially interesting, and just sort of do a short, like 10 list. But KMFDM did make this list with How Rook. This is such a great album. So we're up into 2005 now. We've finally gotten a little out of the 90s. I think Astro Creep 2000 was... Oops. That's not what I wanted to do. I think Astro Creep 2000 was... Oh, that was 95. Okay, so yeah, we were still deep in the 90s. So, yeah, 10 years jump here. And really the first album of theirs that I got into was Symbols. So this was an album that I feel like kind of got me back into the band, like really heavily. And I have a bunch of their albums, but this album, man, one of the things I think that really stands out with this, it wasn't produced by Terry Date, was it? No, okay. was so I don't know if I apologize, Lucia, I'm not sure how you'd say that exactly. Her vocals and Sasha's vocals are so cool on this album. The sound, like it's really like you have a lot of room, I think, for like the sounds to sort of breathe in this album, but it's ultra, like the beats are super dancey, and the guitar riffs are like super heavy, and it's just it's like pure KMFDM goodness, and you've got, sort of Lucia and Sasha sort of going back and forth on the vocals in various songs, and probably sometimes on the same songs, and it works so well. Every single one of these songs is amazing, and this album is wonderful. Again, 10 out of 10. Great album by KMFDM. Next, we have Kitty. Now, Kitty is such an interesting band. I was anticipating a documentary coming out about the band. I think it was supposed to be like a couple years ago. I don't know if I assume that it has already come out. And I haven't not seen it, but regardless of that, the point is that the band goes through transformations. They've lost a lot of members, gained a lot of members, sort of switched members between albums, and I think their influences have changed. And so from their first album in the late 90s, I think, to to this album in 2007, to albums they've done since then, it's all very different. Each album is very unique, and this one I just think is 10 out of 10 for me. So you have Morgan Lander, who I think, I'm going to assume in this one, was doing a little bit more like melodic type of vocals, and then you have Mercedes. Mercedes Lander, who was doing. I think a little bit more of like this guttural screaming. Maybe switch the two around. I don't know for certain, but you have that real, again, sort of these two singing styles. One really melodic, one really guttural. And it works amazingly on this album. These songs are all they're really fun. They're super heavy, but I think some Kitty stuff has been like heavier than this. So I think this sort of like does a good job. I guess maybe almost like that kind of grunge music thing of having like the soft parts and the loud parts. I feel like this album like has that for Kitty, and it's not a grunge album in any way. It's pretty much like a metal album, but it's fantastic, and again, like kind of good hooks, like a little poppier maybe than some of their other stuff. I think this is just an incredible album. 14 songs here, and again, I listen to them all. Really great. 10 out of 10. Next up, this was one of the albums that I think I thought of first, actually, when we were talking about 10 out of 10 albums. So another industrial rock band, 9 Inch Nails, essentially Trent Reznor and whomever he's working with. But he's kind of like a one-man music machine, and you go back into the mid 90s there, and so I was introduced to the band with stuff like Pretty Hate Machine and Broken. Now I think they achieved a lot of commercial and success and sort of just popularity with the Downward Spiral, and I love the Downward Spiral. But those albums, I think I come back to Broken a lot. It's an EP, but there are songs on that album and guitar work and stuff that I just think is incredible. Maybe not, just like riffs and stuff that are just awesome, and sounds and stuff too. Again, like it's kind of an aside, but this music that I like, it's from a technical perspective, I think sometimes like musicianship perspective, like I don't know, I learned a guitar a little bit and took guitar lessons for a while and stuff like that. I'm not really a fantastic musician, and I don't think I like sort of musicians necessarily. I think what I like about a lot of these bands is they're playing with noise, they're playing with sounds, and they're playing with rhythms and sort of electronic noises, and they're playing with distorted guitars, and the feeling and the feelings and the emotions that they bring into it. And I don't know, sometimes things that just sound a little creepy. Year Zero is a very creepy album, and but what I think is great about it is it's a concept album. So again, this has a really strong theme. Trent Reznor, I think, conceived of this as, it criticizes contemporary politics. It presents a dystopian vision of the year 2022, and as you go through this album, it tells a story, really. And but beyond that, I think like thematically the songs are all linked very well, just in terms of the sounds, the style, all of that, and it just comes together to like, it's such a better album than the Downward Spiral. then Broken, which is hard to say, then Pretty Hate Machine, then some of that older stuff. It's a great 10 out of 10 album. If you guys you know dig Nine Inch Nails at all, I would highly recommend you checking this out if you haven't, or giving it another listen. This is something I used to listen to in the car. I think one of my buddies got this for me for as a gift, and I would just listen to this in the car over and over and over again. And this is an incredible album. Again, just sort of like, I mean, I'm maybe not putting it on par with like Too Dark Park, but like just like I think a standout of industrial albums. Year Zero is really, really cool. And last up we have Not Show and Tell by the Birthday Massacre. I was looking at some of their stuff. Here we go. Pins and Needles by the Birthday Massacre. Now, I've mentioned them before. I'm not sure if I talked about it on the channel, but I did mention it to the Completionist, and from what he said, I think his wife kind of really got into the band, and then I think he's kind of consequently gotten into the band. So, but I think that's how it works with the Birthday Massacre. The Birthday Massacre are like internet popular, but they're not radio popular. I'll tell you that, because I don't think, I mean, they're on, like, I don't know, Metropolis Records. I mean, I think it's like they don't they never really signed with a major label or anything like that, and they kind of like have sort of self-produced and promoted like a bunch of their stuff. So anyway, so they're a Canadian rock band, but they're really, they talk about like electronic rock, gothic rock, new wave. It's sort of like, if like, it reminds me of like a band that would do a soundtrack to Stranger Things or something like that. They have this great synthesizer stuff in it, and great rock guitar, and the vocalist Chibi, like, it does such a great job. And so here, like, this album, this is their 4th studio album, and I feel like they just hit, like, they were firing on all cylinders with this album. I remember when I got it digitally. I listened to it in the car on my tablet, and I just listened to this straight for like 2 weeks in the car or something. I must have listened to this album like 20 times. And this has, again, I feel like it has a consistent theme. It feels very vampire-ish. This to me, it feels a very vampire-ish song. Or album, I should say. I don't know if that's the case, but like in the dark, pale, I don't know. It's just sleepwalking. Whatever Chibi was sort of like going for with the lyrical aspect of this. I feel like it really works, and I just think this is one of their best albums, and it's easily definitely a 10 out of 10 album for me. Just a super great band if you're into I don't know, like synth music at all, I guess. And again, this is really like electronic rock music. There's a lot of hard elements to it. There's a lot of hard like guitar to it, and the whole band does an amazing job on this album. It's just it's good, great. Oh, actually, yeah, Dave Ogilvy did mixing on this from Skinny Puppy. That's awesome. Okay, well, so, and you can see how it all comes together for me with my 10 out of 10 albums here. So thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting and not too long and not too boring, and I hope you'll join me again for more random videos about junk once in a while when I feel like doing it. Take care, guys.